There is a railroad crossing in Garut that has been lowering its gate since before your parents were born. It does not announce itself with drama. It does not appear on travel guides or trending lists. It sits at the edge of an ordinary road in a regency in West Java, Indonesia, where the mountains stand behind everything like a permanent reminder of scale. And several times a day, without ceremony, the gate comes down, traffic stops, the train passes, the gate lifts, and the world resumes exactly where it left off. Except that it doesn't. Not really. Something has happened at that crossing. Something small and true and almost entirely invisible has happened. Most of the people who were stopped there did not notice it because they were looking at their phones.
Garut is not the most famous name in Indonesian geography. It does not have the volcanic glamour of Bromo or the spiritual weight of Yogyakarta. What it has is something quieter and, in its own way, more difficult to articulate. Garut is a working place. It produces dodol, the dense, sweet toffee-like confection that has been made there for generations. It produces leather goods of genuine quality. It sits in a highland basin surrounded by volcanoes, watered by rivers that come down cold from the mountains. And it has the particular atmosphere of a place that never quite became modern, but also never quite remained traditional. It is suspended between those two states, and its railroad crossing is a perfect expression of that suspension.
The railway line through Garut is part of a network that was built by the Dutch colonial administration of the Dutch East Indies, the VOC's successor state, the colonial government that governed what is now Indonesia for 3.5 centuries. The Penjaga line, running through the highlands of West Java, was completed in stages across the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was built not for the people of Garut, but for the products of Garut. The tea, the coffee, the agricultural output of a highland region that the colonial economy needed to move to the port at Batavia, now Jakarta. The railway was infrastructure as extraction. The tracks were laid in service of a system that treated the land and its people as resources to be transported, processed, and converted into profit. And yet, the railway stayed. When independence came in 1945, when the Dutch were expelled and the infrastructure of the colony was inherited by the new republic, the railway stayed. It became something different. Not an extraction engine, but a connective tissue, carrying people rather than only products, linking Garut to Bandung to Jakarta in a way that the colonial planners had never intended but could not prevent. The railroad crossing at Garut, which the Dutch engineers placed at the intersection of a road and a track with complete colonial indifference to the lives it would interrupt, became instead a place where the rhythms of a free Indonesian town and the rhythms of a national railway found their daily negotiation.
Let us talk about what actually happens at a railroad crossing. Not the engineering, the experience. You are moving. You have a destination. You have a schedule, or something like a schedule, or at least an intention to arrive somewhere at some point before too long. And then, the gate. It comes down in front of you with a mechanical certainty that does not negotiate and does not care about your schedule. The bells ring, or in older crossings, a man in a uniform lowers the gate by hand, which is its own kind of statement. And you stop. You have no choice. The train is coming and the train does not adjust its timetable for you.
There is a man, or there have been many men across the decades, who operates the gate at crossings like the one in Garut. His job has a name in Indonesian: penjaga palang pintu, the guardian of the crossing gate. He sits in a small hut beside the tracks, and he knows the train's schedule the way you know your own heartbeat. Not by consulting a document, but by a kind of bodily attunement that comes from years of sitting in that hut, feeling the vibrations in the track before the train is visible, reading the quality of the silence that precedes the sound. He lowers the gate before the train arrives, not when it arrives. The timing is the whole of the skill.
The penjaga palang pintu is one of the most endangered human roles in modern infrastructure. Everywhere that railways modernize and automate, the man in the small hut disappears. Sensors replace his attention, electronic gates replace his hands, and the intimate, embodied knowledge that he carried, the knowledge of this specific crossing, this specific track curve, this specific train on this specific day, dissolves into a system that works but does not know. The difference between a sensor and a penjaga is not efficiency. A sensor may actually be more efficient. The difference is presence. The penjaga is there. He sees the motorcyclist who is about to ignore the warning. He sees the child who has wandered onto the track. He knows in a way that no sensor does what is at stake. Garut has something that larger cities in Java are rapidly losing: the experience of waiting. Not the frustrated, finger-tapping waiting of urban traffic, but a slower, more accepting pause that is built into the texture of daily life by the railroad crossing and the mountain roads and the pace of a town that still operates on something closer to agricultural time than market time. When the palang pintu comes down in Garut, the ojek drivers turn off their engines. The becek operator leans back in his seat. The woman carrying vegetables on her head sets her load down on a wall. And for 2 minutes, or 3, or however long the train requires, Garut pauses. Not in frustration, in a kind of practiced, inherited patience that is itself a cultural achievement.
The train that passes through Garut is not a high-speed train. It is not a sleek, modern express. It is a diesel locomotive pulling carriages that have been in service for many years, clean but worn, functional in the particular way of Indonesian public infrastructure, maintained with care because replacement is expensive, operated with a kind of dignity that comes from the understanding that this service connects people who have no other option. The passengers looking out the window as the train crosses the palang pintu are going to Bandung or coming from it. They are students, traders, families visiting relatives, workers returning home. The train is their thread back to the places they belong.
There is a specific quality of light in Garut in the late afternoon. The mountains to the south, Gunung Papandayan, Gunung Guntur, catch the lowering sun and throw long shadows across the basin. The air at Garut's elevation has a clarity that the coastal cities have lost under their blanket of haze. And in this light, at this hour, when the palang pintu comes down and the bells begin and the diesel locomotive appears around the curve in the track, trailing its column of dark exhaust, the crossing becomes something that a painter would recognize immediately. Not picturesque in the tourist brochure sense, picturesque in the older sense, worthy of a picture because it contains something true about the way the world is organized, the way the mechanical and the human and the natural exist in a specific relation to each other at a specific moment.
The accidents at railroad crossings in Indonesia are a documented and serious problem. Every year, vehicles, motorcycles, trucks, minibuses are struck by trains at crossings where the gate was ignored or where there was no gate at all. The statistics are a judgment on a particular kind of impatience. The calculation, made in a fraction of a second by a driver who believes they can cross before the train arrives, that their time is worth more than the risk. Sometimes the calculation is correct. Sometimes it is catastrophically wrong. And the crossing does not distinguish between the times. It simply records the outcome.
This is where the palang pintu becomes a moral object. The gate is not just a safety device. It is a proposition about priority. It says, this train, with its hundreds of passengers and its tons of steel momentum, has the right of way. Not because you are less important, but because the system only works if everyone agrees on the sequence. The crossing is a place where the individual's will and the collective's infrastructure meet. And the gate is the physical argument that the collective wins this particular negotiation. Every time, without exception. When a driver ignores the gate, they're not just taking a risk. They are refusing the argument. They are insisting that their individual schedule is more important than the agreement that makes shared infrastructure possible. In the village of Lelis, south of Garut town, there is a crossing that locals call the crossing of the tamarind tree because a very old tamarind tree stands at the corner of the road and the track and has stood there longer than the railway itself. The tree was there before the Dutch engineers came. It was there when the first steam locomotive passed through. It was there when independence was declared. It is there now, and the crossing has grown up around it. And when the gate comes down, the tamarind tree watches with the complete indifference of something that has seen too many things to be impressed by any of them. The tree is the oldest entity at the crossing, and it will be the last to leave. What does it mean that we are building a world in which the palang pintu is automated, in which the penjaga has been replaced, in which the crossing is managed by sensors and signals, rather than by a human being who chose to sit in that hut and take that responsibility? It means we are building a world that is more reliable in measurable ways and poorer in ways that resist measurement. The sensor does not get tired. The sensor does not take tea breaks. The sensor does not wave at the school children who cross the track every morning on their way to school. And those waves, that daily, unremarkable acknowledgement between the guardian of the crossing and the children of the neighborhood are not in any engineering specification, but they are real, and their absence will be felt before it is named. There is a word in Sundanese, the language of West Java, the language of Garut, that does not translate cleanly into English. Someha. It describes a quality of warmth and welcome and ease, a social openness that makes people feel received rather than merely tolerated. The penjaga palang pintu at his best embodies Someha. He is the human face of an infrastructure that could easily be faceless. He is the reason that the crossing, which is by its nature an interruption, feels in Garut like a moment of community rather than an imposition. When you remove the penjaga and replace him with a sensor, you remove the Someha from the crossing. The gate still works, but the quality of the encounter changes entirely. Every person who has grown up near a railroad crossing in Garut carries the sound of the bells in their body. Not as a memory of specific events, but as a rhythm, part of the texture of what that place sounds like, part of the acoustic architecture of home. The bells ring, the gate comes down, the train passes, the gate lifts, the bells stop. This sequence is as much a part of Garut's daily music as the call to prayer from the mosque, or the sound of rain on the mountains, or the particular echoing quality of a market in the early morning. And when we automate the crossing, the sequence continues. The bells become a recorded sound, the gate becomes a machine movement, and something in the acoustic memory of the place shifts slightly in a direction that can only be described as away. If you have ever waited at a palang pintu and felt for just a moment that the waiting itself was not a waste of time, that the pause was somehow necessary, somehow right, then you already carry the answer to that question. Subscribe if you find meaning in the crossings the world is trying to automate away. And tell me in the comments, what crossing are you waiting at right now? What gate has come down in your life, and what are you learning in the pause before it lifts? The gate at Garut will outlast this video. It will outlast most of the things being built today in the name of progress. It will continue to come down and lift again several times a day as long as trains run through the highlands of West Java. What we choose to keep alongside it, the penjaga, the tamarind tree, the practice of stopping without frustration, the someya of an infrastructure that still has a human face. That is the question. Not whether the crossing survives, but whether we understand what it is that we are crossing every time we wait for the gate to lift and then continue on our way.